Does Oregon football need an identity on the recruiting trail to be known for getting one or two positions? The answer is no, and I'll tell you why today. Plus, Mookie Cook in the class of 2023 is the second highest rated recruit that Oregon basketball has ever gotten, trailing only Bol in the class of 2018. What sort of player could he become? And are there any similarities to Dylan Brooks? There just might be. Here we go.
You are Locked On Ducks, your daily podcast on the Oregon Ducks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, it is that time once again for Locked On Ducks. I'm your host, Spencer McLaughlin, D1 play-by-play broadcaster and lifelong Oregon Ducks fan. Thank you for making this your first listen or your first view every day. It's part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your number one source to stay up to date with the Ducks every single weekday. Like and subscribe wherever you are listening to and or watching the show right now on YouTube, on Apple Podcasts. Leave nice comments, 5-star reviews. We like all of that here at Locked On Ducks. And I appreciate seeing all of that. And I enjoy knowing that you are enjoying the show. So we talk a lot of recruiting here on the show. And why wouldn't we? Recruiting year in and year out is often indicative of how teams perform in college football. And so I saw this recently from Max Torres, who posted a question on his discussion board. This wasn't a mailbag question, but if you ever want a question answered here on the show, tweet with the hashtag AskLODPod or DM me at Smalls_55 or at Locked On Ducks are the Twitter accounts. DMs are wide open. So Max Torres will be on tomorrow's episode. I think I know what day of the week it is. I usually don't, frankly. They're just kind of like work days and non-work days, so I'm trying to just keep all of that squared away. But he will be on the show tomorrow. He covers the Ducks. He's been in practice. Tons of good stuff coming. But he posted a question a little while ago that I thought was interesting. And it said, when it comes to recruiting, what position do you want to see Oregon become known for producing? I think this is an interesting question. There are, some schools over the years. It's mostly, I think, driven by ESPN on Instagram, and it's, fun to look at and such. Like which school is quarterback university, right? QBU or DBU or LBU, if that's the thing for linebackers. I don't even know, but I saw this and thought about it, and was considering like, is there one position that I would really want Oregon to be known for? If I had to pick one, I guess I would say pass rusher, but I don't want Oregon to be known specifically for one position. Now, I think that, and I don't think the schools that have gotten that label, right, for a while there, Ohio State was DBU, but they were producing other high-quality players, right? They've sent a couple offensive linemen, not as many as of late since Ryan Day has been there, but they've sent the Bosa brothers and Chase Young, and they sent I think some linebackers back in the day and DBs, right? So that's kind of their calling card, so to speak. But I don't think that that's an intentional thing from a recruiting standpoint where they're saying, well, we always want to have the best DBs. Because when I think about what I want from Oregon football on the recruiting trail, I don't want to be known as a school who, can produce really good Vs, but isn't quite as good over here. And you got to watch out for, this position from that school because they tend to be not as good. I would like to be, in a perfect world, a school known for recruiting every position at a high level. I know it sounds really, really simple, but I think that, posing this question makes people think, oh, maybe we need to focus on this, or maybe we need to focus on that and become known. We want to have an identity for this, that, and the other thing. I really don't think that's the case, and I think that under Dan Lanning and this staff, the way it's constructed, most of the highly rated recruits, though Josh Connerly on the offensive side of the ball, for sure, the 5-star offensive lineman that I've been talking about this week, most of the elite high-level players that Oregon will get, not all, but a lot of them, because our head coach was a defensive coordinator, are going to come on that side of the ball. You'd probably look at pass rushers first and then corners and then linebackers in that order. In terms of where I expect the staff to be able to recruit, the most NFL caliber players. And so I think that most guys are likely to be on the defensive side of the ball. Doesn't mean you can't have, elite offensive players, right? Georgia, where Dan Lanning came from, has got Kirby Smart as a head coach. He was a defensive coordinator with Nick Saban. Now, this past year's Georgia defense, they had some big-time dudes. I mean, absolute game wreckers, right? Nakobe Dean, Seen, the safety, who I always compare to Jeffrey Bossa. I think there are a lot of similarities there. Jordan Davis, a defensive lineman who's probably going to go in the top 10 or 15, definitely a first rounder, right? They have become known for producing elite players on that side of the ball, but they've also produced some really quality offensive talent, right? Alabama sent a bunch of offensive linemen, and Georgia has sent some great running backs to the NFL. Pickens, the wide receiver, is going to get drafted. Like, there are a lot of guys that these big time schools send to the NFL on both sides of the ball. And that always goes back to recruiting, right? Because every now and then you can have a 3 or a low rated 4-star guy who, pops, becomes a great college player, and is a high NFL draft pick. Justin Herbert comes to mind. He was a 3-star recruit. So was Marcus. But generally speaking, when you see the guys like Jordan Davis or Nakobe Dean or these other big names, those are just a couple from Georgia because I was talking about them, but all these other big names that go early in the draft and are edge rushers or corners or linebackers or offensive linemen, they tend to be really highly rated recruits. It doesn't mean that if you're a highly rated recruit, you're going to be a top draft pick. It does mean that if you look at the past few NFL drafts and the guys who have been taken very highly, a lot of them were also highly rated recruits. So it's sort of a, one-way correlation, not entirely, of course, but thinking about this back to Oregon, Alabama back in the day was known for producing elite defensive players, and they still can. Will Anderson will be a top pick in the draft. They've sent Minkah Fitzpatrick. They sent Patrick Surtain. I mean, they're still able to bring in high-level players on the defensive side of the ball. But now, way more than 10 years ago, Nick Saban is bringing in elite offensive recruits, right? Now he's bringing in top quarterbacks like Bryce Young and Tua, who are going high in the draft. He's going to send Evan Neal. They've been sending offensive linemen for a long time. So when you think about the elite players that Alabama sends to the NFL, they don't come from one side of the ball. They used to be more defensively dominant, right? But there were great running backs from Alabama, or at least who had great college careers, and their pro careers were up and down. Derrick Henry, pretty darn good. Mark Ingram, pretty darn good. Trent Richardson, a little bit less good. But I don't think that I want Oregon to be known for, one particular position. Like, oh, you got to get the, going back to Kayvon Thibodeau, you got to get the great defensive ends from Oregon. They'll all be really good. Like, I just want Oregon to be able to produce players at any position. I don't think there needs to be any sort of consistency there, right? I don't think in order to bring in high-level linebackers, you have to churn guys out to the NFL year after year. I think Oregon has had some solid linebacking units over the years who have been very productive in college, but aren't necessarily top draft picks or even, regular NFL caliber players. A lot of them are practice squad guys. And so, and I'm talking like if you go back all the way to Casey Matthews, right? Michael Clay, like those sorts of guys who were really good college players and who were very effective on the defensive side of the ball, but weren't necessarily high level draft picks. So I don't think that, you have to have a Kayvon Thibodeau at every position or a true lockdown corner to be able to then bring in high level prospects at different positions. And so I don't really want Oregon to become known for just one particular position or one particular area or even one particular side of the ball, right? I anticipate that at least early in Dan Lanning's tenure, a lot of his highest rated recruits who he, hopefully sends to the NFL because they're good enough to do that will come from the defensive side of the ball. But that doesn't mean that if after a few years I look around and say, man, they really aren't recruiting, a big time quarterback, or they aren't getting, big time skill position players. Like, that would then be something that would concern me from a recruiting standpoint, because I think you have to be balanced, and just becoming known for, one side of the ball or one position, I don't think that helps you very much. You know what does help you? Built Bars, because they have 17 grams of protein, and that's more than enough to get you through a round of golf, assuming you've eaten something before, but like, it can get you through 9 holes of golf. Easy money. I always eat before the round, and then I eat a Built Bar at the turn. Boom, I'm good to go. And the only reason I don't score well right now, I can't putt. But that's not because of Built Bar, because they taste delicious. They give me that fuel while I'm out on the course. You may enjoy them somewhere else. Replace your candy bars with Built Bars. They're way better for you, and they taste just as good. Go to Built.com. Use promo code LOCK15. Get 15% off your order. That's promo code LOCK15 for 15% off at Built.com. So this Oregon recruiting discussion, I'm not saying that Max is, asking a bad question or anything like that. I think it's an interesting question to look at because schools, get labels about being DBU or QBU or wide receiver U or all that sort of stuff. And I mean, that's great, but I think it's more, something that's happened to schools by chance rather than something that's intentional from a recruiting standpoint. I think that you want to bring in the best players no matter which side of the ball they're on, no matter which position they are on, right? I expect Dan Lanning and this staff to be able to bring in the Josh Connerlys of the world, but I also want them to go after the Jaden Waynes of the world, right? Who play two different sides of the ball, or go after a high-level corner like Jalil Florence, go after Nico Iamaleava and Jaden Rashada. I want them to be able to shoot for the moon, because that's what Oregon needs to get back to the college football playoff. You have to have, at the end of the day, a roster full of guys. And I wanted to bring the discussion to this. So think about the two national championship teams. Obviously, they didn't win. Yes, I know. But the teams that got to the national championship game for Oregon, right? You have 2010, 2011 Chip Kelly team, and then you've got the 2014-15 team with Marcus Mariota. Notice that Marcus is the headliner, less so than Helfrich, because, Helfrich worked for a little while, but then became clear that was not a long-term solution. So when I think back to those two teams and frame it in the context of Oregon recruiting, what I want to see them get in terms of the quality of players and what they will need to, win the Pac-12, be competitive year in and year out for a college football playoff spot. I think the 2014-15 model is more indicative of what I'm talking about here, and that you have to have high-level players who are, eventually NFL caliber by the time their Oregon careers are coming to an end. You have to have that in order to get to the playoff and the national championship game now, because that's those are the sorts of players that other teams are going to go after, right? Is, the Georgias and Alabamas and Clemsons and Oklahomas and, maybe Texas A&M's, that they haven't done it on the field. Yeah, they've done it off the field, certainly, right? If you're going to contend with those sorts of teams, you have to be able to get the same quality of players. And Oregon, with this staff, is capable of doing that. We've seen that in the last several years and the level they recruit at. But as I think back to those two national championship teams, I was looking through that 2010 Oregon football roster. And if you haven't looked at it or you don't remember it super well, you can go look it up. But just kind of go through, look at the headline players. And when I just say the 2010 Oregon football team, what do you think of? You think of fast tempo, you think of LaMichael James, and you think of Kenyon Barr and Darren Thomas, right? And then the skill guys that were there. But you don't think necessarily about, an elite corner that Oregon had. Cliff Harris was very good for maybe some outside reasons. He didn't make it to the NFL. But when you go up and down that roster, it's amazing that Oregon went 12-0, because there's not a flurry of NFL bodies on that team. And that model, I don't think, is super sustainable for a couple of reasons. Number one, you had an elite defensive coordinator in Nick Aliotti, who was doing more than enough with the defense, right? Obviously, the Ducks weren't known for the defense, but you're going to allow a lot of points when you're playing that fast. Aliotti was able to do more than enough on the defensive side of the ball there were some nice players here and there, but in terms of guys who could make it to the next level, they were pretty few and far between. Deion Jordan didn't end up working out, was a top draft pick and such, but his NFL career didn't pan out. Casey Matthews was a practice squad guy. John Boyette, I don't think he ever really made it in the league. So, and then you look at the offense as well, the offensive line and who was playing quarterback and the receivers that were there and where they ended up after the fact. The more I think about it and the more you just look at the roster and the names that were there, the more I think there is exactly one football coach who could have gotten that team to a national championship game, and that's 2010 Chip Kelly. Not 2022 Chip Kelly, because other teams have started to catch up to what he was doing at the time, but Chip Kelly was just so good and so unique on Saturdays that no one had the answers for him yet, and he was changing the game. And then Nick Aliotti on the other side is a really, really smart schematic defensive coordinator. He was really, really good. So the roster itself really wasn't anything special. So when I look back at, that team and the recruits that were brought in, there weren't that many big time high level guys. And this is why we talk about recruiting, because I don't think that formula is very sustainable, because you have to have a coach who is so unbelievably brilliant that other teams are just trying to figure out what in the world he's doing on a weekly basis. And Aliotti was the best second half adjustment defensive coordinator, certainly, that Oregon football has ever had, probably that I've ever seen in college football. I'm sure there are better ones out there. Maybe Dan Lanning will be better, but no one was better at holding the opponent scoreless in the second half than Nick Aliotti. Those two both, their halftime adjustments were the best schematically I think Oregon's had in my lifetime. Anyway, I'm not very old, right? I remember, little snippets of the Bellotti era, but those two at halftime were absolutely brilliant. So I don't think that's sustainable. But then go look at the second team for the Ducks that got to the national championship game, right? You had Mariota, yes, best player in program history. That's a given, not a super easy thing to find. However, I still contend that if Vernon Adams does not hurt his finger against Eastern Washington and misses a few games and plays at Michigan State with a broken thumb, finger, whatever it was, I think that team gets back to the college football playoffs. So Mariota is the reason they got to the national championship game, but it was a playoff caliber roster when you look at the quality of guys that they had, because they had more NFL bodies, right? They had Troy Hill. They had Ifo Ekpreolamu. Troy Hill has been a starter in the NFL for the last several years. Ifo would have been had he not been hurt. He was a first team or second team All-American. Armstead and Buckner, we know how good those guys are. Hronis Grasu, right? Those are just the headliner names for guys who didn't just make it into the league, but have had thriving, successful careers. That's a more sustainable model for Oregon football. And that's why we talk about recruiting so much and why it is so important to bring in the sort of high caliber players that can turn into NFL bodies. Because looking back at 2010, that was doing the absolute maximum with, good recruiting classes, but certainly not like the sorts that we've seen the last several years and what we now know Oregon is capable of, and what I personally think Dan Lanning and the staff are going to be capable of in the coming years recruiting for Oregon football. So bottom line here, even with the best player in school history, right? Heisman Trophy winning season, he was exceptional. No one can ever debate that. That team can't win the Rose Bowl and get to a national championship without having several quality position players. This goes back to what I was talking about earlier, right? I don't want Oregon to become known for just one or two positions. You have to have depth. You have to be able, as a recruiting staff, to bring in high-level players and develop them at multiple positions. You can't be dominant just on one side of the ball, right? Even though, look at Georgia this past year, right? Their calling card was their defense. That's where a lot of their great players came from. They also have Dalvin Cook's brother as a running back. The other guy they had, I forgot his name. He's a high-level running back. I bet you those offensive linemen are big-time recruits. And Pickens on the outside is a beast at wide receiver. And then they were able to put Stetson Bennett in there, right? That's a more attainable formula than find the next Marcus Mariota, because it's not going to be super findable. But even with Mariota, Oregon still had, that roster in 2014 was way better in the trenches, in the secondary. I think just, front set, really top to bottom. I think aside from skill positions, I think 2014 was significantly better than the 2010 team. And I think that's the model Oregon has to be going for. And, the original question that jump-started all this was, what position do you want Oregon to be known for? I don't know. All of them, ideally. Like, I don't think that there should be one that the staff is going after, and I don't think we as fans should be thinking about it that way. Like, oh, we want to become known for getting all these elite pass rushers. No, we want to get them, but we also want to bring in great corners, because that's a hallmark of a great defense. Getting pressure with four and having a couple lockdown guys on the perimeter, right? That's how you create the sort of defense that'll get Oregon back to where they want to go. Mookie Cook is the second highest rated recruit in Oregon basketball history. What sort of player could he become? I'll tell you after I tell you about Rock Auto. With the ever-increasing numbers of makes and models, it's impossible now for your local chain auto parts store to stock all the parts you need. Save time and money when using Rock Auto. Rock Auto is a family business serving do-it-yourselfers for over 20 years. Their prices are reliably low for every single customer. Go to rockauto.com right now. See all the parts available for your car or truck, right? Locked On in their How Did You Hear About Us box, so they know we sent you. Amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need. rockauto.com. So Mookie Cook, right? We talk a lot about football recruiting, but he got a lot of attention swirling around amongst Duck fans, and rightfully so, because he's the second highest rated recruit in Oregon basketball history. And by the way, just following up here and keeping you up to date, as I promised that I will do at the start of every show, he's staying in the class of 2023. And right now, for next year, he's the only commit in that class, with Jackson Shelstad, who himself is a four-star point guard from West Linn. Last time the Ducks had a four-star point guard from Westland High School. His name was, it's on the tip of my tongue. I don't know. Maybe it'll come to, Peyton Pritchard. Right. Yeah. That went pretty well. And, just a note on that. I've talked about Oregon football and their need to keep the highest quality in-state recruits because there aren't that many in Oregon, but it's the sign of a good program when, the top guys in your state want to stay home and go to your school. And I think Oregon football has done a good job with that. Oregon basketball doing a good job with that as well, because Mookie Cook was, I think, from Jefferson originally. He's been at Arizona Compass Prep. I think that's where he's going to play his senior year. But I bring that up a lot, and I truly do think it's important. If you think I'm overstating it, go ask a Washington fan how they're feeling about all of their in-state talent, of which there's quite a bit, choosing to go elsewhere. Davey Uli and Josh Connerly both coming to Oregon. It doesn't feel good when they leave the state. It feels even worse for the Huskies, I can guarantee you, when they come south to Eugene. But getting back to Mookie Cook here. So he's 6'7", and I'm just relieved that he's a small forward who figures to be a high level contributor for the Ducks, because after this past season, which didn't go as planned and still should have gone better for several reasons, I think the 3-guard lineup, as a regular rotation, or, that being the crunch time 5 on the floor, I think it limited the Ducks in some ways, because it can be tough for smaller guys like Davion Harmon and Jacob Young to get their own shots if they're going up against a bigger athlete. And then defensively, you can be a little bit limited as well. So I'm here for the length. And when you look at Mookie Cook's scouting profile, one thing that stands out, at least to me, is, he's got, the physical traits, and he can work his way inside, finish at the rim. But on ESPN, there was a line in there about, quote, an ability to impact the game without scoring. And they mentioned, being a part of the transition offense and the defense that he's capable of playing as well. And, he can operate in the mid-range. He's got a well-rounded game. He will post guys up down low. He can finish inside, and he contributes at the defensive end. And so I was reading all this, and I just thought, 6'7", mid-range, low post capable guy, expected to have an impact at the defensive end. Boy, that reminds me a lot of Dillon Brooks. And if you recall, Dillon Brooks, who played at Oregon for 3 years and had an outstanding career and is now doing great things with the Memphis Grizzlies, who are kicking butt and taking names there in the Western Conference right now this season. We'll see how they do in the playoffs. But if you remember Dillon Brooks' time at Oregon, he was not a one-trick pony either, right? He wasn't just, shooting from beyond the arc. And I think that's an important part of guys' development is, not just having to go back to one particular thing, right? And I think we saw that growth with Peyton Pritchard a lot. He was just a shooter and he wasn't driving a ton, but then he just started to develop a really well-rounded game. And now he's an NBA quality player who's having, again, a very good season with the Boston Celtics, who are in the playoffs. So a couple of pro Ducks there. If you haven't been following along, they're having very, very nice years. But when I think back to Dillon Brooks, I think of a guy who, brought the energy, brought that smoke every single night. He was tenacious at the defensive end. He was a great finisher at the rim. He loved working in the mid-range. He loved posting guys up as well. When he got to Oregon, he was actually 6'5", 185 pounds. Now he is 6'7", 225. So he grew a little bit during his time at Oregon. I think that helped him, particularly with finishing at the rim and working in the low post area. But I see those characteristics being, put on ESPN by scouting people of Mookie Cook. And I can't help but wonder, is this a Dillon Brooks sort of player? Now, we'll have to see when he does arrive and starts playing, whether or not he can be the sort of emotional and vocal leader that Dillon Brooks was, because that was definitely an elite trait that Brooks had when he was in Eugene for Dana Altman. But in theory, at least, there are a lot of similarities there to their games. Now, the one thing is Mookie Cook's biggest liability. I mean, liability is maybe too harsh of a word at this point in time, but the thing that he needs to improve upon the most, that basically everyone agrees on, he has to become a consistent 3-point shooter. And that was another reason I was actually drawn back to Dillon Brooks. I was like, boy, I don't think don't think Brooks was, an incredibly elite three-point shooter, was he? And then I look back and realize he was a lot better than I remember. He was just under 34% for his first 2 years with the Ducks. Then his third year during the Final Four run, he was over 40% from beyond the arc. Like, I remember him being a capable three-point shooter. I didn't remember him being over 40% as a junior. So I think Cook has the potential to be that style of player, right? A guy who can score inside out. He has to get a more consistent 3-point shot. But I think that's an encouraging thing for the Ducks because really, since Brooks went away, Oregon hasn't had that premier wing who's been the number one go-to guy. And I think the well-rounded nature that Cook's game could potentially have offers that possibility. And we thought we were going to have it in Troy Brown. Never really turned into a number one. He was one and done anyway. Luke King, another 5-star. He was a good player, but he was clearly number two to Peyton Pritchard. And we don't know what the guard situation will be like by the time Cook gets on campus, right? Davion Harmon, maybe he'll use his final year to come back with the Ducks again for a third season. We know he'll be back for a second this year, which, as I talked about on yesterday's show, I'm very happy about. But you never know. They might need a primary ball handler or a go-to guy down the stretch who can get them a bucket or, someone who can bail you out late in the shot clock. I think Cook has the potential to be that, and the similarities to Dylan Brooks are there. We just have to wait and see, until he gets on the court, whether he will be able to play with that sort of energy. But anytime a player of that caliber has got defense in his scouting report, I'm definitely here for it because not everybody does, right? Some guys are like, oh, they're amazing offensive game, do this and this and this. And he's a capable defender. But if he's expected to contribute at the defensive end, that leads me to believe he might have that sort of energy and tenacity that Brooks carried that, made him a number one for Ducks basketball and a really, really good one at that. I appreciate everyone listening. Have a wonderful rest of your day and go Ducks.